The number one question I receive constantly is this. If XRP truly represents the chosen asset for the emerging financial architecture, then why is the price still hovering around $2? Why is it that while Bitcoin approaches $100,000, XRP appears frozen in time? And perhaps most critically, if it's designed for central banks and major institutions, why are retail investors even permitted to purchase it? Today, I'm going to answer those questions from an angle you won't discover on public exchanges or within hype-fueled social media threads, because what appears on the surface is deliberate misdirection, and what's transpiring behind the scenes is a methodical institutional accumulation strategy. While retail participants obsess over daily price action, central banking authorities and major liquidity providers are executing non-disclosure agreements and securing supply through over-the-counter transactions that never register on public order books. We're going to examine the rigorous mathematics explaining why XRP at $10,000 or even $50,000 isn't speculation, it's an architectural necessity. We're also going to reveal why Bitcoin, despite its elevated price, possesses zero functional utility compared to the financial infrastructure Ripple has been constructing. Welcome back to the Black Swan Capitalist. Today, we're pulling back the institutional curtain on the sophisticated accumulation game of 2026. Let's dive in. The hard truth about shadow liquidity. Let's begin with the fundamental reality. 95% of market participants on social platforms are monitoring screens that don't display the actual game being played. If you're questioning why XRP remains around $2 while the world's financial plumbing undergoes replacement, you need to grasp one critical concept: shadow liquidity. Before we proceed further, if you want to position yourself identically to how institutions operate with genuine frameworks, this is precisely why I developed the 100x Club membership. Inside, you receive exclusive weekly stock alerts highlighting high potential opportunities, the exact millionaire blueprint institutions deploy, and proven methodologies to compound capital and systematically grow wealth over time. If you're serious about constructing real financial leverage, the 100x Club membership details are in the pinned comment. You see, retail investors exist and expire by public exchanges: Binance, Coinbase, Kraken. But financial institutions operate in the shadows. They function through OTC, over-the-counter desks, where multi-billion-dollar transactions are negotiated directly between counterparties without ever registering on an exchange's order book. That's precisely why the price displayed on your mobile device isn't moving despite enormous accumulation occurring simultaneously. If the Banque de France or the Bank of Japan decided to acquire 5 billion XRP today, do you genuinely believe they'd access a centralized exchange and execute market orders? Absolutely not. They'd completely destabilize the market before filling even 1% of their intended position. Instead, they utilize XRP escrow mechanisms through strategic OTC arrangements. Non-disclosure agreements are executed. Liquidity is secured at controlled price points to prevent volatility during institutional onboarding. While retail observers stare at seemingly dormant charts, central banking authorities are locking in the fundamental components of their future digital economies behind completely closed doors. Price versus value, understanding the distinction. And here's what you absolutely must comprehend in 2026. Price is not value, and value is not price. These are fundamentally different concepts. Examine Bitcoin closely. Nearly $100,000 in market price, yet possessing zero intrinsic functional utility. Its valuation is propelled by collective social belief, amplified by stablecoins like Tether that are essentially created from nothing, a rebranded iteration of the identical fiat monetary system currently being systematically debased. XRP operates entirely differently. It was never architected for speculation. It was engineered for absolute necessity. Its price doesn't respond to tweets or political theater. It moves when global liquidity structurally demands it. This represents a utility-driven market, and the apparent silence on price charts isn't weakness. It's the calm preceding a fundamental structural repricing event. If you lack the patience to see through the institutional accumulation veil, this asset was never designed for your investment timeline. But if you understand that the chosen monetary instrument must first be systematically locked away in central bank vaults before any public price explosion manifests, then you're positioned exactly where you need to be. The mathematics of impossibility, 10,000 Plauser XRP. Now let's discuss the numerical target people dismiss as impossible. How does a token currently trading at $2 reach $10,000, $50,000, or even substantially higher? Most retail investors analyze this like traditional equity pricing, but XRP is not a stock. It's a monetary instrument operating under entirely different economic laws. In the world of 2026, fundamental value is determined by mathematics and structural necessity, not by hype cycles or social media sentiment. The secret lies in fractionalization capabilities. One single XRP can be subdivided into 1 million units called drops. Let that mathematical reality fully register. If XRP reaches $10,000 per token, one drop becomes worth exactly 1 cent. That means at higher price levels, XRP becomes exponentially more usable, not less accessible. You could purchase a cup of coffee with a tiny fraction of a drop, while simultaneously, a central banking institution could transfer $1 billion across international borders using only a handful of complete tokens. This is precisely what David Schwartz has been articulating for years. A higher priced XRP is objectively a superior payment vehicle. Why? Liquidity efficiency at scale. Let's examine the mathematics carefully. To transfer $1 billion with XRP priced at $1, you require 1 billion tokens. That creates enormous market pressure, substantial slippage, and significant volatility during execution. But at $10,000 per XRP, that identical billion-dollar transfer only requires 100,000 tokens. Do you see the fundamental difference? Higher price equals fewer tokens in motion. Fewer tokens in motion equals less market disturbance, less slippage, dramatically lower volatility. The system transforms into a stable bridge infrastructure, not a speculative roller coaster. That's institutional settlement finality. Banking institutions can settle massive cross-border obligations instantaneously without needing to hoard the entire circulating supply. Bitcoin versus XRP, speculation versus engineering. Bitcoin reached $100,000 without possessing intrinsic functional utility. It achieved that valuation through speculation and collective social belief amplified by narratives. XRP is engineered for an entirely different operational paradigm. Its price isn't a narrative construct, it's a functional architectural requirement. For XRP to effectively bridge the 1.2 quadrillion derivatives market and exceed $150 trillion in annual cross-border payment flows, it must be expensive by mathematical necessity. If the price remains low, the metaphorical pipe becomes too constrained for the ocean of global capital attempting to flow through it. To bear the weight of the global financial system, the bridge must accurately reflect the value of the cargo it's transporting. This isn't speculation. It's not a moon boy fantasy projection. It's the logical mathematical outcome of Ripple's fundamental architecture and design specifications. If you struggle with these numerical projections, you don't have an issue with my analysis. You have a disagreement with the fundamental laws of physics and financial engineering. Finite supply meets infinite necessity. Now let's examine the inevitable collision course between finite supply constraints and infinite structural necessity. There will only ever exist 100 billion XRP. This is algorithmically fixed. You cannot mint additional supply. You cannot implement bailout mechanisms. And you cannot inflate the supply away like fiat currencies currently being systematically destroyed by central banking monetary policies. Position that fixed supply constraint against global financial requirements. The foreign exchange market processes $7.5 trillion every single day. The derivatives market exceeds $1.2 quadrillion in notional value. Cross-border payment flows are surpassing $150 trillion annually. Here's the mathematical reality retail participants consistently ignore. Even if XRP captures merely 1% of that economic activity, we're discussing trillions of dollars attempting to squeeze through a microscopically narrow conduit. And if only 25 billion XRP are actively circulating, with the remainder locked in escrow mechanisms or held by institutional entities, then each individual XRP token must represent an enormous quantity of transferable value. This is where scarcity dynamics meet mathematical inevitability. We're discussing each token needing to bridge approximately $60,000 to $100,000 in value transfer capability, just to maintain basic systemic functionality. XRP as global reserve currency, the design reality. This is precisely why XRP is architecturally designed to function as a global reserve currency. By fundamental definition, a reserve currency must be held in substantial quantities by central banking authorities and financial institutions to ensure adequate liquidity pools. Replacing the nostro vostro correspondent banking system, where trillions of dollars sit completely idle in foreign bank accounts purely to facilitate settlement, requires every central bank globally to hold XRP in their reserve vaults. And understand this distinction clearly. Banks don't think like retail investors. They don't concern themselves with buying low and selling high speculation. They concern themselves with velocity metrics. How rapidly can value transfer occur? When XRP reaches full utility deployment, it stops functioning as a cryptocurrency and becomes a monetary settlement instrument. At that developmental stage, it effectively gets removed from the retail accessible market because the price becomes too elevated for average individuals to purchase even a single complete token. They'll be transacting in drops, fractional units, while institutions move billions using whole tokens. The Clarity Act, the final green light. The Clarity Act of 2026 represents the final regulatory green light. It's the moment when legal frameworks finally catch up to mathematical realities. When those regulatory gates fully open, demand will not be propelled by hype cycles or political tweets from any administration. It will be driven by the systemic requirement to efficiently move the world's wealth across borders and between institutions. XRP reaching $10,000 or $50,000 isn't a speculative prediction based on hopium. It's a functional requirement for the system to operate at global scale. The architecture that David Schwartz and Ripple's founders constructed simply cannot function at the intended scale if the price remains structurally low. You are holding the only asset in modern financial history that is mathematically programmed to become expensive by architectural necessity. The Hidden Wall Street Toolkit. What most retail traders fundamentally fail to recognize is that Ripple hasn't merely been building a token or blockchain platform. They've been systematically assembling a complete institutional Wall Street operational toolkit. In late 2025 and early 2026, the strategic pieces snapped into position through the $1 billion acquisition of Hidden Road and the substantially larger multi-billion dollar operational integration that followed. Ripple now operates a prime brokerage and custody infrastructure stack that handles the settlement plumbing for billions in institutional capital. Major institutions aren't speculating on price movements. They're integrating XRP directly into daily treasury management operations and cross-border settlement workflows. When platforms managing $12.5 trillion in corporate transaction volume are utilizing XRP-backed liquidity pools for settlement, the $2 price you observe on Binance becomes functionally irrelevant to the actual institutional accumulation occurring behind the scenes. This is where the Clarity Act fundamentally changes everything. It finalizes XRP's legal transition from a crypto asset classification into a recognized monetary instrument for settlement purposes. Once the regulatory green light is completely illuminated, shadow liquidity begins transitioning into transparent markets. Non-disclosure agreements reach expiration, and the broader market discovers that the circulating supply has already been contractually spoken for by governmental entities and central banking authorities. The OTC accumulation strategy. Let me paint a clearer picture of what's actually happening right now in January 2026. Major central banks and sovereign wealth funds aren't waiting for retail price discovery. They're not competing with you on Coinbase order books. They're negotiating massive OTC blocks directly with Ripple, with Ripple's institutional partners, and with major liquidity providers who've been accumulating for years. These transactions happen at negotiated prices, often with lockup periods, vesting schedules, and contractual obligations that ensure price stability during the transition phase. Why would a central bank want to cause a price explosion before they've finished accumulating their required reserves? They wouldn't. They want maximum accumulation at minimum cost, which means keeping public price suppressed while shadow accumulation continues. This is why you see seemingly contradictory signals, massive institutional partnerships being announced, major regulatory clarity approaching ETF approvals and institutional products launching. Yet price remains range-bound around $2. It's not market failure, it's market design. The accumulation phase must complete before the repricing phase begins. Comparing Bitcoin's path versus XRP's trajectory. Bitcoin reached $100,000 through a completely different mechanism than what XRP will experience. Bitcoin's rise was fueled by retail FOMO, fear of missing out, institutional speculation through ETFs, stablecoin creation, providing buying power, narrative driven bull cycles, limited supply meeting speculative demand. XRP's eventual rise will be fueled by entirely different forces: central bank reserve requirements, settlement necessity for cross border payments, derivatives market bridging requirements, legal clarity, eliminating regulatory uncertainty, mathematical necessity for high price to enable liquidity efficiency. Bitcoin doesn't need to be expensive to function. It doesn't really function as anything except a store of value narrative. XRP must be expensive to function. Its entire utility model depends on high valuation to enable efficient large value transfers. This is the critical distinction most analysts miss. The velocity requirement. Here's another mathematical reality. For XRP to settle the daily volume of global cross-border payments efficiently, even at $10,000 per token, you need extraordinary velocity. Velocity means how many times each token is used per day. If the same XRP token can settle 10 different transactions in a 24-hour period through rapid settlement, 3 to 5 seconds per transaction, then the effective liquidity is multiplied by that velocity factor. This is why Ripple's technology focuses obsessively on settlement speed. Faster settlement equals higher velocity equals less total supply needed to move massive value. But there's a floor to this equation. Even with maximum velocity, if you're settling $150 trillion annually in cross-border payments alone, the mathematics demands a high per-token valuation. The system literally cannot function at scale with $2 XRP. It's mathematically impossible given the volume of value that needs to move through the network. Recent developments accelerating the timeline. Recent developments in early 2026 are accelerating this timeline faster than many anticipated. Regulatory clarity. Advancing, the Clarity Act is moving through final legislative stages with bipartisan support, signaling imminent classification certainty. ETF integration. Multiple XRP ETF products have launched or received approval, creating new institutional on-ramps that were previously unavailable. Central bank pilots. Expanding. More central banks are publicly acknowledging CBDC pilots and cross-border settlement experiments utilizing Ripple technology and XRP for liquidity. Hidden road integration. The acquisition has begun operationalizing, with major institutional clients being onboarded to Ripple's prime brokerage and custody infrastructure. Stablecoin partnerships. Ripple's RLUSD stablecoin is gaining regulatory recognition in key jurisdictions like Dubai, creating additional utility layers for the XRP ledger ecosystem. Each of these developments isn't just news, it's infrastructure being built for the repricing event. Why you're still allowed to buy it. This brings us back to the original question. If XRP is designed for institutions and central banks, why can retail investors still buy it? The answer is multifaceted. First, decentralization requirements. For XRP to function as a truly decentralized settlement layer, it cannot be exclusively held by institutions. Distributed ownership is a feature, not a bug. Second, liquidity bootstrapping. Retail markets provided the initial liquidity and price discovery mechanism that allowed the ecosystem to develop. That foundation was necessary. Third, the eventual transition. As price rises into the thousands or tens of thousands, retail won't be buying whole tokens. They'll be transacting in drops for daily use, while institutions hold the bulk of whole tokens for settlement. Fourth, regulatory optics. If Ripple or institutions attempted to lock retail out before the repricing, it would create regulatory scrutiny and accusations of market manipulation. The current structure allows for organic price discovery, while institutional accumulation continues behind the scenes. You're allowed to buy it now because the institutional accumulation phase isn't complete. Once it is, you won't be priced out entirely. You just won't be buying whole tokens anymore. The psychology of waiting. I understand the psychological challenge of watching Bitcoin rally to $100,000 while XRP consolidates around $2. It tests patience. It creates doubt. It makes you question whether the thesis is wrong. But understand this. Bitcoin's rally is the distraction. It's capturing attention, absorbing capital, and creating FOMO while the real institutional game plays out quietly in XRP's shadow markets. When XRP's repricing occurs, it won't be a gradual climb like Bitcoin's multi-year bull runs. It will be a structural repricing event that happens rapidly once the trigger is pulled, whether that trigger is full Clarity Act implementation, a major central bank announcement, or the expiration of institutional NDA periods. The mathematics are too compelling. The architecture is too sophisticated. The institutional positioning is too far advanced. What institutions know that you don't? Here's what major institutions understand that retail participants generally don't. They know that patience is rewarded in accumulation phases. They know that volatility is expensive when building large positions. They know that regulatory clarity is the final piece before massive capital deployment. They're not concerned about $2 versus $3 versus $5. They're positioning for 1,000 plusers, and at that scale, accumulating anywhere under $10 is essentially the same entry point. They're thinking in decades, not days. They're building infrastructure, not chasing candles. And most importantly, they understand that the asset with the strongest fundamentals often moves last in a cycle because it doesn't need hype to justify its eventual valuation. It needs infrastructure, and infrastructure takes time to build. The final verdict for 2026. So here is the conclusive assessment for January 2026. Price is the distraction. Value is the reality. If you're still frustrated that XRP trades at $2 while Bitcoin approaches $100,000, you're thinking within the old paradigm. Bitcoin's price is constructed on social belief and stablecoin inflation. XRP's eventual price will be built on mathematical necessity and global liquidity requirements. One represents a speculative bubble, the other represents critical infrastructure. The world's wealth is being systematically digitized, and XRP is the rail system that will transport it. When the final regulatory switch is activated and Nostro Vostro correspondent banking accounts are replaced by instant XRP settlement, retail participants will be effectively priced out of accumulating whole tokens. You won't be purchasing complete tokens at that stage. You'll be transacting in fractional drops for everyday use. Positioning for what's coming. If you want to understand how institutions position themselves before these structural shifts occur, including high potential stock opportunities and the exact frameworks institutions deploy to systematically scale capital, check out the 100x Club membership linked in the pinned comment. The information I share there goes far beyond XRP analysis. It's about understanding how major financial shifts occur, how to position before they become obvious, and how to build lasting wealth rather than chasing temporary gains. The institutional takeover of XRP isn't coming, it's already happening. The only question is whether you recognize it before the repricing event makes it obvious to everyone. The mathematics don't lie, the architecture doesn't lie, the institutional positioning doesn't lie. XRP at $2 isn't a failure of the thesis, it's confirmation of the accumulation strategy. And those who understand this distinction will be positioned for the most significant repricing event in modern financial history. The bridge is being built. The regulations are being finalized. The institutions are accumulating. And the mathematics guarantee that when the system goes live at scale, the price must reflect the value it's designed to transfer. That's not speculation. That's engineering. And in 2026, we're closer to that reality than we've ever been before.